Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue talking about my current project of coding the combat system for a viewer's game. More specifically, I'd like to talk about skills. In my previous video, where I was talking about the new weapon, the chainsaw, I said that the character wielding the chainsaw, once they made the attack, had to make a skill roll, and then different things happened depending on whether they succeeded or failed with that, but that I hadn't done any code in relation to skill rolls yet. So that I would have to do that. So that's what I'm going to do in this video and subsequent ones. So let's zoom in a little. There we go. So we're going to mostly be looking at this new passage that I've put here called skill roll. I won't show you, as you can see, it has an arrow leading to it from PC side attacks, but I won't be talking about that side of things till the next video. I'm just going to talk about the general principles of making a skill roll. But first we need to look in initialize, because we need to have some data if we're going to have a list of skills and how they work, etc. Well, obviously that's going to require some data. And what we use is an array called skill. So the way the skills work, this is probably a bit unusual for a tabletop role-playing game. Usually you might have that skills add to an attribute. That's how it works in, for example, the 3rd edition of Dungeons and Dragons. So you might roll and you have an attribute bonus for your intelligence, let's say, but then you might have another bonus for your for a more specific thing like diplomacy or something like that, and then you add both of those to a roll. The way this works is you have 12 general classes of things that you're trying to do, and they're all called can something. So that's just how the person who's designed it has named them, and I've named them the same in order to make it as easy as possible to reconcile the two things that we're doing. So we have can fight, can smash, can squick. That's the one that we're going to be looking at in relation to the chainsaw, because it's your ability to sort of get over. It's kind of like a willpower roll. It's sort of your ability to get over being disgusted and grossed out and so on. Can notice, can solve, can fix, can shoot, can escape, can steal, etc., etc. And you can see that they're in 4 groups of 3. Each of those groups relates to an attribute. You probably remember there's 4 attributes: strong, smart, sneaky, and sexy. And these are the strong skills, the smart skills, the sneaky skills, and the sexy skills. And most of the time, when you're doing for example, a sneaky skill, most of the time you will use the sneaky attribute. But there are some exceptions, and this array keeps track of that. So let's look at can fight. Can fight, the array is an empty space. I've done that just because I find it easier to count from 1 than from 0, so I just put quote for slot 0 so that we don't use it. And then we've got 1, 1, 1, 1. Well, what does that mean? Well, the number 1 relates to an attribute. In this case, 1 means strong. But why are there 4 different, why are there 4 different entries? Why isn't there just a single one? Well, there's 4 different entries because it's for the 4 different personas, which are the equivalent of character class in this game. So the 4 different personas are warrior, scientist, scoundrel, and influencer. And so in this particular case, 1, 1, 1, 1 means the warrior uses attribute 1, the scientist uses attribute 1, the scoundrel uses attribute 1, and the influencer uses attribute 1. So this is a fairly simple one. Everyone just uses their strong attribute when they are called upon to make a fight roll or a can fight roll. But there are, and that's also true of can smash, for example. But there are others where it's not so simple. So we can see that there's several where there's different numbers for different personas, and also sometimes there's a 0. So let's deal with the 0 first. A 0 means that you automatically get a strong success, which is like a critical success. It's the best success. So, for example, in Can Squick, the warrior uses attribute 0 instead of attribute 1, and that just means they get an automatic. They automatically get the best possible result. So when they are called upon to try and sort of not be disgusted, to try and keep acting despite the fact that something horrible's happened, they automatically can do it. Because the thing that we're using Can Squick for in this particular case is going to be when you attack with a chainsaw and you hit, you have to make a Can Squick roll or you lose your next action, basically. So the warrior is always going to do that. And then when we look at the scientist, they don't use attribute 1, they use attribute 4, their charisma. The scoundrel uses attribute 1, so that they're sort of normal in this case. And the influencer uses their sneaky attribute instead of their strong attribute. And sometimes those different, well, certainly the 0 is always an advantage, and each persona has one particular thing that they have an advantage in. So the warrior has an advantage in Can Squick. The scientist, when there's a Can Solve roll, they automatically pass it as, get the equivalent of the maximum roll. The scoundrel can steal, and the influencer can sense. So that's all pretty straightforward. But sometimes using the different attributes is a disadvantage, and sometimes it's an advantage. So, for example, the warrior, when they steal, normally they would use their, you can see that that's in the sneaky group, and most people use sneaky for most things in that group. But the warrior uses smart instead. And I'm pretty sure that's a disadvantage for the warrior. But at other times it's an advantage. They get to use a better attribute. But in any case, we keep track of all these. Some of them are identical. So, for example, Can Fight and Can Smash, they're exactly the same. So you could sort of have them as a single skill, but it's, I guess, easier to just remember the names of things if you have the two separate ones, which is why you wanted the separate ones. Similarly, Can Shoot and Can Escape, even though they're using the same attributes, they're very different actions in the fiction of the game. So, all right, we've got the data. How do we do something with it, and how does it work? Well, it's the same thing as rolls that we've seen before, which is that you roll 2 dice and add the value of the attribute that you have. And then you compare that to a set range where less than 4 is a long failure, 4, 5, and 6 is a failure, 7, 8, and 9 is a success, and then 10 or more is a long success or a critical success, a sort of extra good success. But let's go through it line by line. So when you are sent to skill roll, well, let me give you the only example of it that we have so far, which is down here. You have to specify what skill you're using, and you have to put that into $Y, the temporary variable $Y. Sorry, there's one more thing I'll show you which might not have been obvious. and that is that the skills, when we set it up, it doesn't use the normal square brackets. It uses these curly brackets. And you might remember, if you've been following that series, that's because that's so it will save. If we use square brackets and you have the array indexed with text, as we do here, instead of numbers, then there's a problem with saving it. We saw that when we were doing, was it weapon? No, it wasn't weapon overview. It was weapon attack. So you have to set it up with curly brackets. But when you're adding the individual entries, you can just use the normal square brackets. Now, of course, you could just use curly brackets for everything, and that might be easier to remember. But I started using curly brackets before I knew that that problem existed, and that's why I haven't gone back and sort of updated it. But anyway, so let's have a look at PC side attacks, where we have the example of a skill roll. So you have to set $Y equal to whatever skill you're going to roll against, and then you include skill roll, and that's going to give you a result, as we'll see. And here we have a list of the different what the different variables mean. So there's a lot of temporary variables here, so that's why I have this list. So we have INI underscore who, that stands for who has initiative, and that is the character making the roll. If it's 0, it's the player character. If it's 1, it's companion 1, and if it's 2, it's companion 2. Y is the skill to roll against. We saw that. So these two must be set before we include the skill roll. These other variables are things that we're going to work out on this page. So we have W, which is the attribute to roll against, or 0 for automatic long success. V is the value of attribute W, if relevant. If relevant meaning because if we have an automatic long success, we don't have to bother with that value. X2 is the final result. Oh, sorry, Z2 is the final result. Y2 and X2 are the 2 dice rolls, and W2 is the total of the 2 dice rolls plus the value of the attribute. So, what do we do? Well, first of all, we ask, is INI underscore who equal to 0? Because that will tell us whether we're dealing with a player character or a companion. Monsters won't make skill rolls, so this is always going to be people on the player's side sort of thing. So if INI who equals 0, then W, the attribute to roll against, well, we look in skill. And what are the 2 dimensions of the skill? Well, first of all, the skill that we're rolling against, so that's Y, and $PER, which is the persona of the player character. So this is going to give us a number from 0 to 4, with 0 meaning an automatic success and 1 to 4 meaning attributes 1 to 4. And then V, we look in ATT underscore PER, which is attributes by persona, and the 2 dimensions are PER, the persona, and W, the attribute that we've extracted from this skill array. Now, if W is 0, this is going to give us a value that we can't use. Now, I don't know whether this is going to give us... No, it should be... Sorry, I do know. Sorry, I just tested that. Okay, so this is only relevant if W is 1 to 4. If it's 0, this is just going to give us nothing useful, because ATT-PER, I'll show you how it works. ATT-PER, I mean, we have seen it several times before because it's one of the earliest ones that we set up, but obviously, you know, we've gone through a lot, so it's worth refreshing our memory. And of course, I can't find it. Hang on, let me try again. Should be up here somewhere. It's meant to be in alphabetical order, but I don't think it's quite. There we go. Okay, so this is attributes by persona. These 4 are not relevant to this because these are personas that the player character and their companions in this little simulation they're never this, if that makes sense. These are sort of lesser non-player characters that you might pick up. These 4 are the ones that the player character can be and the more powerful companions can be as well. So we might look in, let's say 3 if we've got a scoundrel, and then we might look in attribute 3 if we're looking at attribute 3 and we get a value of 3. Great, that's the best one. If that other variable is 0, it'll give us just this text. Well, that's not useful because we need a number. But that's okay, because if W is 0, it's an automatic success. We don't need V. We don't need to know what the value of the attribute is, because we're not going to be doing any rolling and adding the attribute. We'll just go straight to saying it's an automatic long success. So V might be a sort of nonsensical answer. It will be if W is 0, but that's okay, because if W is 0, we won't ever use V. And for the companions, it's exactly the same, except instead of PER, we use com ini underscore who 1, because $com stands for companion, and that is the array where we keep track of a lot of details about the companions, one of which is their persona, and that's kept in that particular place. Okay, so we print player character, or companion 1 or companion 2, rolls can squick, or whatever the skill is that we're dealing with, and then we put a couple of line breaks. And there's an if, which is based on whether W is equal to 0. And it's if W is equal to 0, well, that's quite simple. It's an automatic long success, and we set Z2 equal to 2, remembering that Z2 is the result, and that's -1, 0, 1, or 2. So if W is equal to 0, it's quite simple. We just do that. Otherwise, we've got a quite complicated bit of code that we have to do. And then either way, we do a couple of line breaks. So let's look at this more complicated one. First of all, we simulate rolling 2 dice, X2 and Y2. Then we set W2, the total, equal to X2 plus Y2 plus V. So the roll of the 2 dice plus the value of the relevant attribute. So this is the only place where V is used, and that's why V can have a nonsensical value if W is equal to 0, because of course we don't ever refer to V. Then we just print the result, and that's going to print something like, and I'll type it out so it's a bit easier to follow. Roll is something that might be 5 plus 1, and then it'll say plus, and then this is the attribute name. So something like strong bracket 1 equals, and in this case that would be 0. So it'll give you a bit of text, something like this. All right. So and then a couple of line breaks. Again, keeping everything on separate lines. Then we assign a value to Z2, this same one that we gave a value of 2 up here, based on what W2 is. So if it's less than 4, it's a long failure, and Z2 is equal to 1. Otherwise, if it's less than 7, it's a failure, and Z2 is equal to 0. Otherwise, if it's less than 10, it's a success, and Z2 is equal to 1. Otherwise, it's a long success, and Z2 is equal to 2. Now, I don't know if in some skill roles, a long failure and a failure might not be any different, and in some skill roles, a success and a long success might not be any different, but we still keep track of it just in case there is a distinction. So 3 or less is a long failure, 4, 5, or 6 is a failure, 7, 8, or 9 is a success, 10 or more is a long success. And then, as I said before, we have 2 line breaks. So that's what we've done in PC-side attacks. We haven't done the consequences of that yet. As you can see, when we get down to it, we go to this. This is within an if the attack is chainsaw 1. This is specific to the chainsaw attack. We do make the roll, but of course there needs to be consequences of the roll, and we haven't done the consequences yet. So the other thing we need to do is when the sort of lesser personas make a roll, because the skill roll, as you can see, it's sorry, I've zing. There we go. The skill roll, it's only got 4 entries. Well, what about the other, the lesser attributes, the elder and the child and that sort of stuff? Well, they're fairly straightforward. They just make a roll against whatever attribute is the skills group. Like they do the sort of default behavior. So, but I haven't done code for that yet, because in this simulation we only ever have the warrior and the scoundrel and the scientist and the what's the other one? Oh, the influencer, of course. So that's what I'll be doing next. I'll be doing probably the results of failing the squick roll when you attack with a chainsaw. And then I'll be moving on to the other special weapons. But for now, I will leave it there. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.